I stared at the email announcing Linda Donovan's promotion to Director of Client Relations, the position I'd been promised for 18 months. 3 years of 60-hour weeks, million-dollar client acquisitions, and system innovations that transformed our company meant nothing. Marcus Donovan had given my job to his 24-year-old niece who couldn't distinguish revenue from profit. I walked into his office with my resignation letter, smiled warmly, and said, "Congratulations to Linda." He laughed, telling me I'd crawled back within a month. He had no idea what I'd just set in motion. The fluorescent lights in my cubicle buzzed overhead as I cleaned out my desk, each item triggering memories of battles fought and victories stolen. My nameplate read, Alyssa Chen, Senior Client Relations Specialist, but that title never reflected what I actually accomplished at Techflow Solutions. I started here 3 years ago as a junior analyst fresh out of business school with student loans and determination. Marcus hired me during the company's growth phase when they desperately needed someone who understood both technology and client psychology. Within 6 months, I'd redesigned their entire customer relationship management system, creating automated workflows that increased client satisfaction scores by 43%. The system I built became Techflow's competitive advantage. While competitors struggled with client retention, we maintained 92% renewal rates. I remembered working until midnight for weeks testing algorithms and refining processes. Marcus took credit during board presentations, calling it his innovative leadership initiative. My first major client acquisition was Paramount Industries, a manufacturing company worth $12 million annually. I spent months understanding their supply chain challenges, developing customized solutions that saved them hundreds of thousands in operational costs. When the contract signing happened, Marcus arranged the photo opportunity to feature himself and Linda, who had started working here just 2 months earlier. That pattern repeated itself constantly. I'd research prospects, build relationships, and design proposals. Linda would appear at the final presentations reading scripts I'd prepared, while Marcus praised her natural business instincts. The clients often seemed confused, asking follow-up questions that Linda couldn't answer. I'd step in tactfully, providing technical details while she received recognition. The promotion promise started 14 months ago. Marcus called me into his corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Portland. He sat behind his mahogany desk, expensive suit, impeccable silver hair, perfectly styled. "Alyssa, you're our secret weapon," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "When the director position opens up, it's yours. You've earned it." I felt genuine excitement for the first time in months. Finally, recognition for my contributions. A salary increase that would let me move out of my cramped apartment. Respect from colleagues who currently directed questions to Linda despite my superior expertise. But Marcus had already made different plans. I discovered this 3 weeks ago when I accidentally overheard his phone conversation with his sister Linda's mother. "Don't worry, Rachel. Linda will get the promotion regardless of what happens. She needs the experience, and I need someone I can trust in that position. These other employees are just cogs in the machine." The words hit me like ice water. Everything made sense suddenly. Linda's confident demeanor despite obvious incompetence. Her casual attitude toward deadlines and client commitments. She knew the position was guaranteed. I started paying closer attention to Marcus's behavior. During client meetings, he'd interrupt my presentations to redirect attention toward Linda. When I submitted quarterly reports, he'd delay reviewing them until Linda could collaborate and add her name. My innovations became team efforts, while her minimal contributions received disproportionate praise. The final insult came 2 days ago. I was preparing for the promotion interview, rehearsing answers and gathering documentation of my achievements. Janet from Human Resources called me aside, her expression uncomfortable. "Alyssa, I need to inform you that the director position has been filled internally." Marcus felt that Linda's fresh perspective and family connection to company values made her the ideal candidate. Family connection to company values. The euphemism was almost laughable if it weren't so infuriating. I researched Linda's qualifications that evening. Bachelor's degree in communications from a state school, mediocre grades, 6 months of actual work experience. Her resume listed summer internship at Techflow Solutions during college, which meant Marcus had been planning her career trajectory for years. Meanwhile, my credentials filled 2 pages: MBA from University of Oregon Client Management Certifications, revenue generation exceeding $15 million, system innovations adopted across the industry. None of it mattered because I wasn't family. But Marcus made one crucial mistake in his nepotistic scheming. He underestimated my understanding of Techflow's corporate structure and legal obligations. During my second year, I discovered something that would prove far more valuable than any promotion. As I packed my laptop and personal items, I smiled, thinking about the conversation Marcus would have with Wellington Capital's legal team very soon. He had no idea that his arrogance and illegal favoritism were about to cost him everything he'd built. Linda walked past my desk wearing a designer suit probably worth more than my monthly salary. She paused, tilting her head with manufactured sympathy. "I'm sorry things didn't work out for you here, Alyssa. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Sometimes people just aren't cut out for leadership roles." I looked up at her, maintaining perfect professional composure. "You're absolutely right, Linda. Sometimes people reveal exactly who they are when given responsibility. I'm sure you'll do wonderfully in your new position." She smiled, missing the subtle edge in my voice completely. Within 24 hours, she'd understand what I really meant. The elevator doors closed behind me for the last time as a Techflow employee. But this wasn't the end of my relationship with the company. It was the beginning of something much more interesting. My resignation letter took 47 drafts to perfect. Each word needed to serve multiple purposes: maintaining professional standards, documenting my concerns, and creating legal protection for what was coming next. I delivered it personally to Marcus at 9:15 on Tuesday morning, knowing he'd be reviewing daily reports and feeling confident about his successful manipulation. His office smelled like expensive cologne and fresh coffee, a stark contrast to the anxiety now churning in my stomach. "Marcus, I'm submitting my formal resignation from Techflow Solutions effective in 2 weeks. He glanced at the letter without reading it, that familiar smirk playing across his face. "This is about the promotion, isn't it? You're throwing a tantrum because Linda got the position you wanted." "Not at all. I think Linda is perfectly positioned for the role. I simply have other opportunities to pursue." His confidence faltered slightly. Marcus thrived on emotional reactions that he could manipulate or dismiss. My calm professionalism clearly confused him. "What other opportunities? You've been here 3 years. This industry is smaller than you think, and word travels fast about employees who can't handle disappointment." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. I'd seen Marcus destroy other employees' reputations through whisper campaigns and strategic references. But his intimidation tactics wouldn't work this time. "I understand your concern, but I'm confident in my professional relationships and track record." Over the next few days, I executed my departure strategy carefully. Each client conversation was scheduled as a transition meeting to ensure continuity of service. What actually happened was something entirely different. Robert Chen from Paramount Industries was my first call. His company represented our largest single contract worth $12.3 million annually. I'd worked with Robert for 18 months solving complex logistical challenges and implementing cost-saving measures. "Robert, I wanted to personally inform you that I'll be leaving Techflow Solutions at the end of next week. Linda Donovan will be taking over client relationships." The silence on the phone lasted several seconds. Linda Donovan, the young woman who attended our last quarterly review. Elisa, she couldn't answer basic questions about our implementation timeline. "I'm sure she'll develop the necessary expertise quickly. I've prepared comprehensive transition documents. This is very concerning. Paramount's relationship has been with you specifically. Your understanding of our operations and challenges made Techflow valuable to us. Without you there, I'm not sure why we'd continue this partnership." I maintained careful neutrality while Robert expressed his frustrations. By the end of our conversation, he'd scheduled a meeting with Marcus to discuss contract modifications. Similar conversations with Meridian Technologies, Foster Industries, and Quantum Systems produced comparable results. Marcus called an emergency meeting Friday afternoon. His corner office felt different now, the expensive furnishings seeming more like desperate attempts at importance rather than symbols of success. Linda sat beside his desk, looking uncomfortable and out of place. "Elisa, I've been hearing from several clients about your departure. They seem upset, which is unprofessional behavior on your part." I simply informed them of the transition timeline and introduced Linda as their new point of contact. "Well, their reactions suggest you said more than that. Paramount is threatening to terminate their contract unless we provide adequate account management. What did you tell them?" I told them the truth. Linda will be handling their account going forward. Marcus's face reddened. The truth according to who Linda is perfectly qualified for this position. She has fresh ideas and energy that will benefit our clients. Linda shifted nervously in her chair. Uncle Marcus, maybe I should sit in on a few more client meetings before taking full responsibility. Some of these contracts are really complex, and I want to make sure I understand everything. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Even Linda recognized her own limitations, which made Marcus's promotion decision even more indefensible. Nonsense. You'll learn by doing just like everyone else. Alyssa is being deliberately obstructive because she's bitter about not getting promoted. I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice level and professional. Marcus, I want Techflow to succeed. That's why I've documented all client relationships thoroughly and offered to train Linda on account management procedures. If the clients are concerned, perhaps additional preparation would be beneficial. We don't need additional preparation. We need you to stop undermining Linda's authority with negative comments to clients. The accusation was both false and telling. Marcus was panicking about client reactions, but couldn't admit his mistake without losing face. Instead, he chose to blame me for consequences he'd created. I haven't made any negative comments about Linda or Techflow. I've been entirely professional in all communications. Then explain why 3 of our biggest clients called this week expressing concerns about service continuity. Perhaps you should ask them directly about their specific concerns. Marcus stood up, pacing behind his desk. I know what you're doing, Elisa. You think if you create enough problems, I'll beg you to stay and give you the promotion. But I don't negotiate with manipulative employees. The irony was almost overwhelming. Marcus, who had manipulated my career for 3 years, was accusing me of manipulation for revealing the truth about his decisions. I'm not asking for anything, Marcus. My resignation stands as submitted. Fine. In that case, let's discuss your transition responsibilities. I expect detailed documentation of all client relationships, system passwords, and project statuses. You'll also need to sign a non-compete agreement and confidentiality clause. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I'd be happy to provide transition documentation. However, I'll need to review any additional agreements with my attorney before signing. Your attorney, this is standard procedure, Alyssa, unless you're planning something vindictive. Not at all. I simply believe in protecting my professional interests, just as Techflow protects its corporate interests. The meeting ended with obvious tension. Marcus was realizing that losing me would create significant operational challenges, but his pride prevented him from admitting the mistake. Linda looked increasingly worried about inheriting responsibilities she wasn't prepared for, but they had no idea what was really coming. While Marcus focused on damage control and client retention, I was preparing to trigger consequences far more serious than canceled contracts. That evening, I made a phone call that would change everything. Amanda Foster's office, Wellington Capital. How may I help you? Hello, this is Alyssa Chen from Techflow Solutions. I need to speak with Ms. Foster about a potential violation of our Series B funding agreement. The Wellington Capital offices occupied 3 floors of Portland's most prestigious downtown building, all glass and steel, reaching toward the gray Oregon sky. I sat in their conference room Wednesday morning, watching Amanda Foster review the documents I'd spent 2 years quietly collecting. Amanda was everything Marcus pretended to be: genuinely successful, intellectually sharp, and ethically grounded. In her mid-40s, she'd built Wellington Capital into one of the Northwest's most respected investment firms through careful due diligence and principled business practices. Alyssa, these are serious allegations. You're claiming systematic discrimination and nepotism in violation of our key personnel protection clause. Yes, I've documented everything carefully because I hoped it wouldn't come to this point. The key personnel clause was something I'd discovered accidentally during my 2nd year at Techflow. While researching contract modifications for a client, I'd accessed the corporate legal files and found Wellington Capital's original investment agreement. Most employees never see these documents, but my system administration responsibilities gave me broad access to company records. Section 12.7 was buried deep in the legal language. If key personnel are terminated, constructively discharged, or displaced through discriminatory practices or nepotism, Wellington Capital reserves the right to demand immediate operational audit, management restructuring, or complete investment withdrawal. The clause defined key personnel as employees whose departure would materially impact operations, client relationships, or competitive position. As the architect of Techflow's customer relationship system and manager of their 3 largest accounts, I clearly qualified. I'd hoped never to use this information. Despite Marcus's favoritism and credit stealing, I believed in Techflow's potential and wanted to build my career there. But his decision to promote Linda forced my hand. "Walk me through the timeline," Amanda said, pulling out a legal pad. "The discrimination started almost immediately after I joined the company. Marcus consistently took credit for my work, excluded me from strategic meetings, and gave my projects to Linda to present. When the director position opened, he promised it to me for 14 months while secretly planning to give it to his niece. I showed Amanda the evidence I'd gathered, email threads where Marcus attributed my innovations to Linda client feedback, praising my work while crediting her financial records, showing the revenue I generated versus the recognition I'd received. "This performance review from last year is particularly telling," Amanda noted. "Marcus writes that you lack leadership initiative, while simultaneously documenting that you led 3 major client acquisitions and developed systems adopted company-wide. He was building a paper trail to justify denying my promotion while grooming Linda for advancement." Amanda's legal background was evident in her methodical approach to reviewing evidence. She understood corporate manipulation tactics and could see patterns that might escape other investors. "The financial impact concerns me most," she said. "Techflow's client retention and revenue growth are directly attributable to your contributions. If Marcus replaces you with his unqualified niece, our investment is at serious risk. 3 major clients have already expressed concerns about service continuity. Paramount Industries is threatening to terminate their $12 million contract. And Linda Donovan's qualifications: 6 months of work experience, bachelor's degree in communications, no technical training or client management expertise. Her uncle hired her directly into a senior position, despite having no relevant background." Amanda made detailed notes while I explained the situation. Her questions were precise and probing, designed to understand both the legal violations and business consequences. "There's something else," I said, producing my final piece of evidence. "I discovered that Linda has been sharing confidential client information with Syntech Solutions, Techflow's primary competitor. She's been dating their business development manager and discussing our pricing strategies and client concerns." Amanda's expression hardened. "That's a clear breach of fiduciary duty and potentially violates our confidentiality requirements in the investment agreement. I have copies of text messages between Linda and Jeremy Morrison from Syntech. She shared details about Paramount's cost concerns and Meridian's timeline pressures. That information helped Syntech submit competing proposals with strategic advantages." "How did you obtain these messages?" "Linda asked me to help her with technical issues on her company phone. While troubleshooting, I discovered the message history. I documented everything because I was concerned about corporate security." This revelation elevated the situation from employment discrimination to potential corporate espionage. Wellington Capital had invested $25 million in Techflow based on their competitive position and client relationships. If Linda's information sharing had compromised that position, the investment was fundamentally threatened. "Elisa, I need to ask directly, what outcome are you seeking here? Are you hoping to get your job back, receive compensation, or simply cause problems for Marcus?" The question was fair and important. My motivations needed to be clear for any legal action to proceed ethically. I want Techflow to succeed and treat employees fairly. I built systems and relationships that benefit the company, and I'm proud of that work. But I can't allow Marcus to destroy those achievements through nepotism and incompetence while putting your investment at risk. "So you're willing to work with us to resolve this situation constructively?" "Absolutely. I believe in Techflow's potential, but not under Marcus's current leadership approach." Amanda closed her legal pad and leaned back in her chair. "I'm going to discuss this with our legal team and the other Wellington partners. If everything you've presented is accurate, we have grounds for immediate action under the key personnel clause." "What would that action look like?" "Complete operational audit management review and potentially emergency governance changes to protect our investment. Marcus would be required to cooperate fully or face investment withdrawal and accelerated repayment terms." The implications were staggering. Marcus had leveraged Techflow's assets against Wellington's investment, meaning sudden withdrawal could force bankruptcy. He'd built his empire on borrowed money and inflated performance metrics that depended entirely on the employees he was now alienating. How quickly could this process begin? If our legal team confirms grounds for action, we could have representatives in Techflow's offices within 24 hours. These clauses exist specifically for situations like this, where management decisions threaten investor interests. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. This was what Marcus deserved for his years of manipulation and discrimination, but the consequences would extend far beyond him. Innocent employees would face uncertainty, clients would be disrupted, and the company's future would become uncertain. But Marcus had created this situation through his own choices. My responsibility was to protect the legitimate interests that he was betraying: investor rights, employee fairness, and client service quality. "There's one more thing you should know," I told Amanda. "I've accepted a consulting position with Hartwell Associates effective Monday. I'll be available to assist with any transition or investigation needs, but I won't be seeking reinstatement at Techflow." Amanda smiled for the first time during our meeting. "Hartwell Associates is an excellent firm. Congratulations on your new position." "Thank you. They recruited me specifically because of my work at Techflow and my relationships with clients like Paramount Industries." "Which further demonstrates that Marcus's assessment of your capabilities was completely wrong." I left Wellington Capital's offices feeling vindicated, but sobered by what was about to unfold. Marcus thought he'd won by giving Linda my promotion and forcing me out of the company. Tomorrow he'd discover the true cost of his arrogance and discrimination. The elevator descended toward the parking garage as I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Marcus, probably dealing with more client concerns. By tomorrow evening, client retention would be the least of his problems. Justice was coming to Techflow Solutions, and Marcus had no idea what he'd unleashed. The call came at 6:47 Thursday morning while I was preparing coffee in my apartment kitchen. Marcus's voice crackled through my phone, strained and desperate, in a way I'd never heard before. "Alyssa, what did you do?" "There are lawyers from Wellington Capital in our conference room demanding access to company records. They're talking about contract violations and operational audits." I sipped my coffee slowly, watching morning light filter through my kitchen window. "I'm not sure what you mean, Marcus. I resigned last week, remember? Don't play games with me. This is about you, and we both know it. They're asking specifically about personnel decisions and client relationships. You went behind my back to our investors." I exercised my rights as an employee who witnessed potential violations of corporate agreements. Wellington Capital took the concerns seriously. Potential violations. "You sabotaged this company because you didn't get a promotion. Do you have any idea what this could cost us?" The irony was delicious. Marcus was experiencing the first taste of accountability for decisions he'd made without considering consequences. For 3 years, he'd manipulated situations to benefit himself while dismissing the impact on others. Now the tables had turned completely. "Marcus, I documented everything carefully and presented factual information to Wellington Capital. They're conducting their own investigation based on their contractual rights. We need to talk. Can you come in today? Maybe we can work something out." "I don't work for Techflow anymore. If Wellington Capital needs my cooperation, I'll work with them directly." The line went quiet for several seconds. "Alyssa, if you torpedo this company, you'll destroy jobs for innocent people. Is your revenge worth that?" "This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability and proper business practices." I hung up and finished preparing for my day. My consulting contract with Hartwell Associates didn't start until Monday, giving me time to assist with Wellington Capital's investigation if needed. At 10:30, Amanda Foster called with an update. "Our legal team reviewed your documentation overnight. We're invoking the Key Personnel Protection Clause immediately and demanding full access to Techflow's operational records." "How is Marcus responding?" "He's cooperative on the surface, but clearly panicking. Our forensic accounting team discovered several irregularities that go beyond the personnel issues you raised." This was concerning, but not surprising. Marcus's willingness to manipulate employee records suggested broader ethical problems with his management approach. "What kind of irregularities?" "Inflated salaries for family members, inappropriate expense accounts, and vendor contracts with companies owned by his relatives. The nepotism extends far beyond Linda's promotion." My stomach tightened. I'd focused on employment discrimination, but Marcus's corruption apparently ran much deeper. "Are we talking about fraud?" "Potentially. Our investigators found payments to Donovan Family Consulting, which appears to be owned by Linda's mother. They've received over $300,000 for strategic advisory services, with no documentation of actual work performed. The scope of Marcus's misconduct was staggering. While I'd been focused on career advancement and fair treatment, he'd been systematically looting the company to benefit his family members. There's more, Amanda continued. Linda's information sharing with Syntech Solutions appears to be part of a broader pattern. We found evidence that she's been feeding them competitive intelligence for months, potentially, in exchange for future employment opportunities. How did you discover that? Your documentation led us to examine her phone records and email communications. The corporate espionage is extensive and sophisticated. She's been photographing client documents and sharing strategic information about upcoming proposals. I felt genuinely shocked. Linda's incompetence I'd expected, but deliberate corporate espionage suggested a level of malice I hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just unqualified for her position, she was actively betraying the company. What are the legal implications? Federal charges are possible. Corporate espionage involving interstate commerce can trigger FBI involvement. At minimum, it's grounds for immediate termination and civil litigation. The investigation was expanding beyond anything I'd imagined when I first contacted Wellington Capital. What started as an employment discrimination complaint was becoming a comprehensive examination of corporate fraud and espionage. "We need your continued cooperation," Amanda said. "Can you meet with our investigators this afternoon?" "Of course. I want to ensure Techflow's legitimate interests are protected, even if Marcus's behavior has compromised the company." The Wellington Capital conference room felt different when I returned that afternoon. Instead of just Amanda and legal counsel, the room contained forensic accountants, corporate investigators, and compliance specialists. The scope of their inquiry reflected the seriousness of their discoveries. Patricia Moore, the lead forensic accountant, walked me through their preliminary findings. Beyond the family payments, we discovered systematic inflation of revenue figures provided to investors. Client contracts were reported at full value, even when actual payments were significantly lower. How significant? Techflow reported $28 million in annual recurring revenue to Wellington Capital. The actual figure appears to be closer to $19 million. The difference was hidden through creative accounting and delayed recognition of contract modifications. Marcus had been lying to his investors about fundamental business metrics. The implications for Wellington Capital's investment were enormous, and the potential legal consequences for Marcus were severe. We also found evidence of bid rigging, added James Rodriguez, Wellington's legal counsel. Marcus appears to have been sharing competitor proposal information with preferred vendors in exchange for kickbacks disguised as consulting fees. The room fell silent as the magnitude of Marcus's corruption became clear. This wasn't just nepotism or poor judgment. It was systematic criminal behavior that threatened the company's survival. "What happens now?" I asked. "We're filing formal complaints with the SEC and FBI," Amanda replied. "The investment agreement gives us authority to assume operational control immediately to protect our interests and those of Techflow's legitimate stakeholders. And Marcus, he'll be suspended pending the investigation outcome. If charges are filed, he'll likely face significant prison time and financial penalties." I felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness. Marcus had brought this on himself through years of corrupt behavior, but the consequences would extend to employees, clients, and the broader business community. Techflow had real value and potential that his misconduct had jeopardized. "Linda will be terminated immediately," Patricia added. "The espionage evidence is overwhelming, and she poses an ongoing security threat to client confidentiality." "What about the other employees?" "Most appear to be uninvolved in the misconduct. We'll work to minimize disruption while implementing proper governance and accountability measures." The investigation was moving quickly now that Wellington Capital understood the scope of Marcus's corruption. Within hours, Techflow Solutions would be under new management, and Marcus would be facing federal criminal charges. As I left Wellington Capital's offices that evening, I reflected on how dramatically the situation had evolved. My initial goal was simply to expose employment discrimination and nepotism, but by standing up for basic fairness, I'd uncovered systematic fraud that threatened investor interests and client security. Marcus's downfall was entirely self-inflicted. His arrogance and sense of entitlement had led him to believe he was above accountability. Tomorrow he'd discover how wrong he'd been. Justice was coming to Techflow Solutions, and it would be more complete than I'd ever imagined. Friday morning arrived with Portland's typical February rain, but inside Techflow Solutions, the storm was just beginning. I watched from the coffee shop across the street as Wellington Capital's team entered the building at 8 sharp, carrying briefcases and portable equipment for their comprehensive audit. My phone buzzed with the text from David Kim in the IT department. "FBI agents just arrived. Marcus locked himself in his office. Linda is crying in the bathroom. What did you do? I'd worked with David for 2 years, and he was one of the few employees who understood the technical systems I'd built. His support might be crucial as Wellington Capital worked to stabilize operations. I reported violations of investor agreements. Wellington is protecting their interests and ensuring proper business practices. Good for you. Most of us knew something was wrong with the family hiring and project assignments. Nobody had the courage to speak up. That response revealed an important truth. My situation wasn't unique or hidden from other employees. Marcus's favoritism and corruption were obvious to anyone paying attention, but fear of retaliation kept people silent. By taking action, I'd given voice to concerns that many employees shared but couldn't express safely. At 10:15, Amanda Foster called with an update. Marcus is refusing to cooperate with our investigators. He's claiming executive privilege and demanding that we work through his attorney. Does he have legal grounds for that position? None whatsoever. The investment agreement specifically grants us audit rights and requires full cooperation from management. His refusal is grounds for immediate breach of contract. What's your next step? We're invoking emergency provisions that allow us to assume operational control. Marcus will be suspended without pay, and we'll install interim management to protect the business. The speed of these developments reflected Wellington Capital's experience with corporate governance crises. They understood that Marcus's continued presence would compromise both the investigation and business operations. How are employees responding? Better than expected. Most seem relieved that someone is finally addressing the obvious problems. Several have volunteered information about questionable practices they witnessed. This confirmed my impression that Marcus's corruption was widely known but systematically ignored due to his position of authority. Employees had been protecting their jobs by staying silent about behavior they knew was wrong. There's been an interesting development with Linda, Amanda continued. She contacted our legal team this morning, requesting immunity in exchange for full cooperation with the investigation. What kind of information is she offering? Details about Marcus's instructions to share client information with competitors, documentation of the fake consulting contracts with family members, and evidence of his attempts to manipulate financial records for investor reports. Linda's decision to cooperate suggested she understood the serious legal jeopardy she faced. Corporate espionage charges could result in federal prison time, making cooperation with investigators her best option for avoiding severe consequences. Is she credible? Our investigators think so. She has access to Marcus's email communications and recorded several conversations where he explicitly instructed her to breach confidentiality agreements with clients. The irony was striking. Marcus had promoted Linda because he thought family loyalty would ensure her silence about his corrupt activities. Instead, her fear of criminal prosecution was turning her into the star witness against him. At 2:30, I received an unexpected call from Thomas Anderson, one of Techflow's board members. I'd met Thomas briefly at company events, but we'd never had direct business interactions. Alyssa, I owe you an apology. The board should have been paying closer attention to Marcus's management practices. Your courage in reporting these problems may have saved the company. Thank you, Thomas. I hope Techflow can recover and continue serving its clients effectively. That's why I'm calling. Wellington Capital has asked me to serve as interim CEO while they complete their investigation. I'd like you to consider returning to help stabilize client relationships and system operations. The offer was unexpected but logical. I understood Techflow's technical infrastructure better than anyone else, and my relationships with key clients would be crucial for maintaining business continuity. I've accepted a consulting position with Hartwell Associates starting Monday, but I'd be willing to work with Techflow on a consulting basis to ensure smooth transitions. That would be enormously helpful. Several clients have called asking specifically about your availability to continue managing their accounts. This confirmed what I'd suspected. Techflow's client relationships were personal connections that couldn't be easily transferred to other employees. Marcus's decision to force me out had threatened the company's most valuable assets. I'll discuss consulting arrangements with Wellington Capital and Hartwell Associates. Client service should be the priority during this transition. Agreed. We're also implementing new governance policies to prevent future misconduct. Your experience with proper business practices will be invaluable. The conversation revealed how completely Marcus's authority had collapsed. Board members who had previously rubber-stamped his decisions were now seeking guidance from the employee he'd tried to marginalize and drive away. That evening, I met Sarah from accounting for dinner at our usual restaurant near downtown Portland. She'd been my closest friend at Techflow and one of the few employees who understood how Marcus had been undermining my contributions. "Everyone's talking about what happened," she said over wine and pasta. "Marcus tried to call an all-hands meeting this afternoon, but Wellington's lawyers shut it down. He's been escorted out of the building." How are people reacting? Mixed emotions. Some are worried about job security, but most are relieved that his favoritism and manipulation are finally being addressed. The family hiring was obviously unfair, and his credit stealing was getting ridiculous. Sarah's perspective was important because she understood workplace dynamics from a different vantage point. Her accounting role gave her insight into financial irregularities that other employees might miss. "There's something else you should know," she continued. "Janet in HR has been shredding documents all week. She's probably trying to destroy evidence of discriminatory practices and improper hiring decisions. Have you reported this to Wellington Capital's investigators?" "Not yet, but I will." Janet was complicit in a lot of Marcus's schemes. She helped create fake performance reviews and modified personnel files to support his preferred narratives. This revelation suggested that the corruption extended throughout Techflow's management structure. Marcus hadn't acted alone. He'd recruited accomplices who helped implement his discriminatory and fraudulent practices. What about the other employees? Are they supporting the investigation? Absolutely. People are coming forward with stories about retaliation, suppressed complaints, and manipulated evaluations. Marcus created such a toxic culture that everyone has examples of his misconduct. The investigation was uncovering systematic problems that went far beyond my individual case. Marcus had created an environment where corruption was normalized and accountability was discouraged through fear and favoritism. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how completely the situation had reversed. A week ago, Marcus was confidently celebrating his successful manipulation of the promotion process. Tonight, he was facing federal criminal charges and had lost everything he'd built through decades of work. But this wasn't simply revenge or comeuppance. It was accountability for behavior that had harmed employees, investors, and clients alike. Marcus's corruption had threatened Techflow's survival and betrayed the trust of everyone who depended on the company's success. Justice was being served, but it was justice that served broader interests beyond my personal grievances. That made the outcome both satisfying and meaningful in ways that simple revenge could never be. The following Monday marked exactly 2 weeks since I'd submitted my resignation to Marcus. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in Wellington Capital's conference room reviewing plans for Techflow's restructuring under new leadership. Amanda Foster spread documents across the mahogany table, each one representing a piece of Marcus's collapsed empire. The FBI filed formal charges this morning, 19 counts including wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to defraud investors. What's the likely sentence if he's convicted? 15 to 20 years in federal prison, plus restitution requirements that could exceed $3 million. His personal assets have been frozen pending the investigation outcome. The magnitude of Marcus's fall was staggering. 2 weeks ago, he'd been laughing at my resignation, confident in his power and position. Now he was facing the destruction of his freedom, reputation, and financial security. What about Linda? She agreed to plead guilty to lesser charges in exchange for full cooperation. 18 months in federal prison, plus probation and community service. She'll testify against Marcus at trial. Linda's cooperation had proven invaluable to investigators. Her recordings of Marcus's instructions to commit corporate espionage provided clear evidence of his criminal intent and leadership of the conspiracy. The board voted unanimously to terminate Marcus for cause, Amanda continued. That voids his severance package and triggers repayment clauses for bonuses received over the past 3 years. He'll owe the company approximately $1.7 million. And Techflow's operational status, surprisingly stable. Thomas Anderson is doing an excellent job as interim CEO, and your consulting work has maintained client relationships effectively. Revenue projections are actually improving under proper management. This outcome exceeded my most optimistic expectations. Not only had justice been served regarding Marcus's misconduct, but Techflow was emerging stronger and more ethical under new leadership. Patricia Moore, the forensic accountant, joined our meeting to discuss financial discoveries. We've identified the full scope of Marcus's embezzlement scheme. Fake vendor payments to family members totaled over $2.8 million across 4 years. How did he hide such large amounts? Sophisticated accounting manipulation and document falsification. He created shell companies owned by relatives and submitted invoices for non-existent consulting services, technology purchases, and marketing campaigns. The complexity of Marcus's fraud revealed long-term planning and systematic deception. This wasn't impulsive misconduct, but carefully orchestrated theft that had been growing for years. Were other employees involved? Janet in Human Resources faces charges for document destruction and conspiracy. 2 vendors appear to have been complicit in the fake billing schemes, but most employees were victims rather than participants. This distinction was important for Techflow's recovery. The company's workforce remained largely intact and trustworthy, providing stability during the leadership transition. Client reactions have been overwhelmingly positive, Thomas Anderson reported when he joined our meeting. Paramount Industries renewed their contract for 3 years after learning about the investigation. They appreciate our commitment to ethical practices and transparency. What about Syntex Solutions? They're facing their own investigation for corporate espionage. Several of their recent contract wins are being reviewed for possible fraud based on information Linda provided. Their reputation in the industry is severely damaged. The consequences were extending beyond Techflow to impact the broader competitive landscape. Marcus and Linda's actions had contaminated Syntex business practices and exposed them to legal jeopardy as well. There's something else, Thomas continued. The board wants to offer you the permanent position of Chief Operating Officer. Your consulting work has demonstrated exceptional leadership capabilities, and clients specifically request your continued involvement. The offer was flattering and represented complete vindication of my professional capabilities. Marcus's assessment that I lacked leadership potential had been thoroughly disproven by actual results under pressure. I'm honored by the confidence, but I'm committed to my position at Hartwell Associates. I'd be happy to continue consulting on specific projects as needed. We understand. Your integrity and professionalism throughout this crisis have been remarkable. The door is always open if circumstances change. That evening, I met my parents for dinner at their favorite restaurant in suburban Portland. They'd been following the news coverage of Techflow's situation with pride and concern for my well-being. "We're proud of you for standing up to corruption," my father said over dessert. "It took courage to challenge someone with Marcus's power and influence." The decision wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Too many people were being hurt by his actions for me to stay silent. "What happens now?" my mother asked. "Techflow will recover under better leadership. Marcus will face consequences for his crimes, and I'll continue building my career based on merit rather than favoritism or connections." The conversation helped me process the emotional complexity of recent events. While I felt vindicated and satisfied with the outcome, there was also sadness about the necessity of such dramatic action to achieve basic fairness and accountability. 6 months later, I received a letter from federal prison where Marcus was serving his sentence. The envelope surprised me, though I wasn't sure whether to open it. Curiosity eventually won, and I read his brief message. "Alyssa, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to acknowledge that you were right about everything. My arrogance and favoritism destroyed the company I'd worked decades to build. You tried to do excellent work despite my interference, and I responded by trying to punish you for my own insecurities. I'm sorry for the way I treated you, and grateful that you saved Techflow from my corruption. You deserved better leadership than I provided." The apology was unexpected but meaningful. Marcus had lost everything through his own choices, but at least he'd gained some understanding of how his actions had affected others. Techflow Solutions thrived under Thomas Anderson's leadership, implementing ethical policies and merit-based advancement that attracted talented employees and loyal clients. The company became a model for corporate governance and accountability in the Portland business community. Linda served her prison sentence and struggled to find employment afterward, her reputation in the technology industry permanently damaged by the espionage charges. The professional consequences extended far beyond legal penalties, serving as a deterrent for others who might consider similar misconduct. My consulting work with Hartwell Associates flourished, built on relationships and expertise developed during my time at Techflow. Clients valued my integrity and problem-solving capabilities, leading to opportunities throughout the Pacific Northwest technology sector. But the most satisfying outcome was knowing that justice had been served not just for me personally, but for all the stakeholders. Marcus's corruption had threatened investors who deserved honest financial reporting, employees who deserved fair treatment, and clients who deserved competent service. Sometimes standing up for what's right requires accepting significant personal risk and uncertainty, but the alternative, allowing corruption and injustice to continue unchecked, ultimately causes greater harm to everyone involved. Marcus learned that lesson too late to save his career or freedom. I learned it just in time to save my integrity and future. 2 years have passed since I walked out of Techflow Solutions with my resignation letter and a plan that would change everything. As I sit in my corner office at Hartwell Associates watching the Portland skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows, I often reflect on that pivotal moment when I decided to fight back against injustice rather than accept it quietly. Techflow Solutions has become a completely different company under Thomas Anderson's leadership. The ethical policies we implemented together have created a workplace culture based on merit transparency and respect for all employees, regardless of their family connections or personal relationships with management. Revenue has grown by 47% since the investigation, and employee satisfaction scores have reached industry-leading levels. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. Rebuilding trust after systematic corruption requires consistent demonstration of new values and priorities. Every hiring decision, promotion announcement, and policy change had to prove that the company had genuinely changed direction. I continued consulting with Techflow for 18 months, helping to stabilize client relationships and train new managers in ethical business practices. The work was rewarding because it allowed me to contribute to positive change rather than simply escape a toxic situation. My relationship with Paramount Industries evolved into something much broader. Robert Chen became a champion of my consulting work, referring me to other companies facing similar governance challenges. My reputation in the Portland business community grew from my technical expertise to include crisis management and corporate ethics. The legal consequences for Marcus were severe but fair. He served 4 years in federal prison and was released on supervised probation with strict financial monitoring. His once impressive mansion was sold to pay restitution to investors, and his business reputation was permanently destroyed. Last I heard, he was working as a junior accountant for a small firm outside Portland, starting over in his late 50s, under circumstances he created entirely through his own choices. Linda faced different but equally lasting consequences. Her 18-month prison sentence was followed by years of unemployment, as the corporate espionage charges made her unemployable in any technology-related field. She eventually found work in retail management, a dramatic step down from the executive position her uncle had given her through nepotism. The experience taught her harsh lessons about the real-world consequences of unethical behavior and unearned privileges. But the most important outcome wasn't Marcus's downfall or Linda's struggles. It was the positive changes that emerged from holding them accountable for their actions. Techflow's success under ethical leadership proved that companies thrive when they focus on merit rather than favoritism. The employees who remained at the company became more productive and innovative when they knew their contributions would be recognized fairly. Client relationships strengthened when based on competence and integrity rather than manipulation and deception. Wellington Capital's investment recovered completely and generated significant returns as Techflow's performance improved under proper management. Their decision to invoke the key personnel protection clause saved not only their investment, but the jobs and careers of dozens of innocent employees who had been working under corrupt leadership. My own career flourished in ways that Marcus's favoritism could never have allowed. At Hartwell Associates, I've built a reputation based on actual achievement rather than political maneuvering or personal connections. My work now includes strategic consulting for Fortune 500 companies facing governance challenges, and I've been invited to speak at business schools about corporate ethics and accountability. The speaking engagements are particularly meaningful because they allow me to share lessons learned from the Techflow experience with future business leaders. I emphasize that ethical behavior isn't just morally correct, it's also the most effective path to sustainable success. Integrity isn't a luxury you can afford when times are good. I tell audiences of MBA students and executive development programs, it's a fundamental requirement for building anything that lasts. Marcus thought he was being clever by manipulating systems and people to benefit his family, but his shortcuts ultimately destroyed everything he'd worked decades to build. The students always ask about the personal cost of challenging corrupt authority. It's an important question because speaking up against powerful people does involve real risks and sacrifices. I lost my job, faced retaliation and intimidation, and endured months of uncertainty about my future. I explain. But the alternative was accepting corruption and becoming complicit in harming other people. That would have cost me my self-respect and professional integrity, which are far more valuable than any single position. These conversations remind me that my experience at Techflow wasn't unique. Many employees face similar dilemmas when confronted with workplace misconduct, discrimination, or corruption. Most choose silence because they feel powerless or fear retaliation. The key is understanding that you have more power than you think, I tell them. Document everything carefully, know your rights and protections, and remember that there are people and institutions whose interests align with fairness and accountability. You don't have to fight corruption alone. That's why I've also become involved with the Portland Professional Women's Network, mentoring young professionals who face workplace challenges. Many of their stories echo my own experiences, being overlooked for advancement, having their contributions credited to others, or being excluded from important opportunities. Your value isn't determined by whether your boss recognizes it, I tell them. Focus on building skills, documenting achievements, and developing relationships with people who appreciate competence over politics. Eventually, merit wins out, but you have to be patient and persistent. One mentee, Jessica, recently faced a situation remarkably similar to my own. Her supervisor was taking credit for her work and promoting less qualified male colleagues over her. She was considering leaving the company quietly rather than confronting the discrimination. "What did you do when you realized fighting back might hurt innocent people?" she asked during one of our monthly meetings. "I focused on the broader impact of allowing injustice to continue unchecked," I replied. "Marcus's corruption wasn't just hurting me, it was threatening the entire company and everyone who depended on it. Sometimes causing short-term disruption is necessary to prevent long-term harm." Jessica decided to document the discrimination and report it to her company's board of directors. The investigation led to policy changes that benefited not just her, but dozens of other employees who had been facing similar treatment. Her supervisor was terminated, and she received the promotion she'd earned through her performance. "I was terrified to speak up," she told me afterward. "But watching you stand up to someone as powerful as Marcus gave me the courage to act. Thank you for showing me that integrity is worth fighting for." Those conversations remind me why the Techflow experience was so important. It wasn't just about my individual career or even about punishing Marcus for his misconduct. It was about proving that systems of accountability can work when people are brave enough to use them. The key personnel protection clause that brought down Marcus exists in many investment agreements, but it's only effective when employees understand their rights and are willing to exercise them. Employment discrimination laws provide protection, but only for people willing to document violations and report them to appropriate authorities. The systems exist, I explain to audiences and mentees, but they require individuals with courage and integrity to activate them. That's where real change begins. My relationship with Wellington Capital has continued to grow stronger. They now consult with me on due diligence for potential investments, particularly regarding management quality and corporate governance. My experience identifying red flags in leadership behavior has proven valuable for protecting their portfolio companies from similar risks. "You prevented a complete loss of our Techflow investment," Amanda Foster told me recently. "But more importantly, you demonstrated the kind of character and judgment we want to see in leadership positions. That's why we keep recommending you to other companies." Those recommendations have led to consulting opportunities throughout the Pacific Northwest and beyond. I've helped companies in Seattle, San Francisco, and Denver implement governance reforms, investigate misconduct allegations, and rebuild cultures after ethical failures. Each engagement reinforces the same fundamental truth. Organizations succeed when they prioritize competence, fairness, and integrity over personal relationships, political maneuvering, and short-term advantages. The financial success has been gratifying, but the personal satisfaction runs much deeper. I wake up each morning knowing that my work contributes to positive change and helps create workplaces where talented people can succeed based on their contributions rather than their connections. That sense of purpose and meaning is what Marcus never understood. He focused on accumulating power and wealth through manipulation and favoritism. But those achievements were hollow because they depended on harming other people. When his schemes collapsed, he had nothing left because he'd never built anything genuine or sustainable. The life lesson from my Techflow experience isn't complicated, but its profound integrity isn't just about doing the right thing when it's easy. It's about having the courage to act when the stakes are highest and the personal cost seems overwhelming. Marcus had multiple opportunities to change course when he first started taking credit for my work, when he began manipulating performance reviews, when he decided to promote Linda, despite her obvious lack of qualifications. At each decision point, he chose personal benefit over ethical behavior, and those choices ultimately destroyed him. I faced my own decision point when I discovered the investor protection clause. I could have used that information as leverage to secure my promotion, kept quiet about the broader corruption, or simply found another job without confronting the systemic problems. Any of those choices would have been easier and less risky. But they also would have allowed Marcus's corruption to continue harming other employees, investors, and clients. Sometimes individual courage is required to protect broader interests, even when the personal cost seems too high to bear. The courage to act isn't something you discover in yourself only when facing major crises. It's built through smaller daily choices to speak up for fairness, give credit where it's due, and treat people with respect, regardless of their position or power. Those habits prepare you for the moments when integrity demands more significant risks and sacrifices. Looking back, I'm grateful for the experience despite its difficulty and uncertainty. It taught me lessons about leadership, courage, and accountability that no business school or mentor could have provided. More importantly, it proved that one person with determination and evidence can challenge even powerful institutions and create meaningful change. The Marcus Donovans of the world depend on good people staying silent and accepting injustice as inevitable. They maintain power through intimidation, manipulation, and the assumption that their victims won't fight back effectively. But when someone does fight back with preparation, patience, and principled determination, the entire corrupt system can collapse surprisingly quickly. Marcus went from confident CEO to federal prisoner in less than 6 months once the truth about his behavior became public. That's the message I want to leave with anyone facing similar challenges in their own workplace or industry. You have more power than you think. There are systems designed to protect your interests, and justice is possible when you're willing to work for it. The key is understanding that fighting for what's right isn't about revenge or personal gain. It's about creating workplaces and communities where everyone can succeed based on their contributions, where merit matters more than connections, and where integrity is rewarded rather than punished. That's the kind of world worth fighting for, and it's the kind of world we can build when we have the courage to stand up for our principles even when the personal cost seems overwhelming. Marcus learned this lesson too late to save his career or freedom. I learned it just in time to save my integrity and build something better than what I'd lost. The choice between easy compliance and difficult courage defines not just our careers but our character. I'm proud of the choice I made, and I hope sharing this story helps others find their own courage when they need it most. What about you? Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between staying silent about injustice or risking everything to do what's right? How did you find the courage to act, or what held you back? I'd love to hear your stories and thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like to help others find it, who might need to hear this message. Consider subscribing for more stories about workplace courage, professional integrity, and the power of standing up for what's right. And if you know someone facing similar challenges in their career, please share this story with them. Thank you for listening to my journey from betrayal to justice. Remember, your integrity is your most valuable professional asset, and it's always worth defending no matter how high the stakes might seem. Until next time, keep fighting for fairness. Keep building your courage, and keep believing that good people can create positive change when they're willing to act on their principles.